Hey, what's going on, YouTube? I hope that y'all are doing well today, and all of my fans. Let's get the subscriptions up into the 300s, please. I would like to get up there, if possible, ASAP, as soon as possible. All right, gonna be doing one more Sega Genesis related video. A year ago, I did do a top 15 best Sega Genesis games. Well, I think that now it's time for the new year to do another list. I'm only going to do this one last list and then I'm just going to leave it be. I'm not going to be going over the same repetitive crap. I mean, the Mighty Puddle Squad might enjoy doing the same type of thing. I don't really. But it's going to be a bigger list. This is a top 25 best Sega Genesis games, in my personal opinion. There's going to be a few games that I mentioned that I don't have, so they'll be going off the top of my head of what I know. So let's go ahead and get started. The number one game on the Sega Genesis is definitely Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It perfected everything and did everything well and right with the Sonic franchise. It was a perfect set of speed, going around, the little loops and collecting the rings and hitting these little enemy creatures in the head, And plus you had Tails in this game to help you along. You didn't have Tails in the first game, but in this one you did, and the two of you worked together to defeat the evil Dr. Eggman. Although some people call him Dr. Robotnik because I don't know. Honestly, I have no clue. But they call him Dr. Robotnik, and some people call him Dr. Eggman, so whatever. But, excuse me. But the platforming and everything, and the jumping, the rev rolling, and it works great. And it's a perfect blend of platforming. It's a great platformer game for the Sega Genesis, and it's definitely the best game on the Sega Genesis. I mean, this game sold Genesis. Like, people were lining up in stores, video game stores to buy a Sega Genesis for this game. So that's a testament how damn good this game actually is. So, it's something to definitely pick up if you have a Sega Genesis, or if you don't want to get a Sega Genesis, you could also get that Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection or the Sonic's Genesis Classics game, which was on PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch, and the other one, Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, being on PS3 and Xbox 360, has this game on it. It's a great game. And I know that there are some collectors out there that say that the third game is the best, which it is a great game, but overall, I don't think that it did anything new. Except maybe some of the lands in the game, some of the art style and levels that you were going to were different than the second game, but overall it played the same, and the gameplay was no different than the second, so I feel that the second one was the best out of the three. Okay, so I'm looking down upon some games I have here. Honestly, I think the second game that needs to be mentioned, I don't own it on Sega Genesis. I own the first game because of the Sega 6-pack, but I don't own the physical card of any of the three. But I do have the first game on the 6-pack game, as I said, and I do own it for the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection game on PS3. And that game is Streets of Rage. It's a great game. All three of them are excellent and fun to play. They're good beat-em-up games on the Sega Genesis and really defined what it was to play as Axel or his friend, or the chick, and go through the levels, side-scrolling, and beating people up, hit people in the head with the little lead pipes and baseball bats. It was a blast. Really fun game, So that's my number 2 pick. My number 3 pick for the Sega Genesis has got to be this game right here, Aladdin. A lot of collectors wouldn't put this high on their list, and I understand that it may not be in their top 3, but honestly, I think Aladdin is a great game. It really proved that movie-based games don't have to suck, that they can actually be good, they can be fun, and actually worth playing sometimes. I say sometimes because, we still get bad uh, licensed games based off of movies and TV shows. But this one and The Lion King were pretty good. I never played The Jungle Book. I know that was also on Sega Genesis for Disney property movie-based games. Ariel the Mermaid, the Little Mermaid game. Beauty and the Beast made 2 games on the Sega Genesis. And Pinocchio was also a Sega Genesis game turned from a movie into a video game. And Pocahontas, I think, was on the Sega Genesis. That game is actually kind of expensive now. I guess because it came out at the end of the Sega Genesis life cycle. But I never played any of them except Aladdin and The Lion King, and they're both great games. They both follow the movies pretty well. There's a cheat code in this game as well. I talked about it in the Sega Genesis collection video I did yesterday, and yeah, it's a great platformer game, but it is hard as shit. Like, you will die a lot in this game. You'll see the same animation where Genie puts you on the rug. It's like, dun dun dun, like that. That's how you know that Aladdin's dead. But yeah, it's a great platformer game, and I highly recommend it. So what is number 4 out of all of these? Because there's quite a few games on the Sega Genesis that are worthy of this 4th spot. I'm gonna say Vector Man 2. Vector Man 2 is a great Sega Genesis game that really defines what Sega is supposed to be. I don't own Vector Man 2 physically, but I own it for that PS3 game, Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection. And it's a fun side-scrolling like shooter with Vector Man. It's a shame that they never made a Vector Man 3 or followed up on later consoles such as the PlayStation 4, or the Xbox One. Guess Vector Man just sort of faded away into obscurity, but it was a good game. The graphics were pretty amazing for the time for a 1995 game. And the levels were pretty interesting and drawn out, so Vector Man 2 was a great game. It was an improvement over the first game. The first game was good too, but the second one was even better. Number 5 for me has got to be Tin Head. A lot of people don't put Tin Head on their list, but it was one of the first games that I played on the Sega Genesis, to be honest. Besides Aladdin and Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and that football game, I didn't have any other Sega Genesis games for a long time, because one of the first times I got a Sega Genesis was when my friend Michael, it's spelled Michial, he spells it differently than it sounds, gave me Sega Genesis Model 2 with some games. The only game that he wouldn't let me have was Dracula. It wasn't Bram Stoker's Dracula. It had an M rating on the front. That cartridge I can't find anywhere. I'm intrigued to find out what the name of that was. I can't seem to find out the name of it. But yeah, that game, he knew that my mom was a Christian and didn't like M-rated stuff, My mom didn't want me playing it, so it was like, I can't give you Dracula. But I did get the football game. I forgot the name of that football game. If I find it, I'll post it in the comments section below. But it wasn't Madden. It was a different football game. It might have been College Football 95 or something. Aladdin, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Tin Head. And this was a great platformer game on the Sega Genesis that just doesn't get enough praise and love. And it's very inexpensive. I got my copy for $8, so you can't really go wrong for that price. You play as this character named Tin Head. He throws bombs out of his head, and there's a lot of platforming, jumping on top of platforms and jumping down, things like that. There are these little creatures you had to fight by throwing bombs. You could throw his bombs straight. You press the C button on it, I think, makes them bounce like this. Or he had another one where it would go down. So he had three ways of, throwing bombs out of your head. And that's what you did to defend yourself. There was no punching or anything like that. So that was your weapon. Bombs. But pretty good game. And it's a shame that it's not on more people's list. They really should give it a chance. Alright, so now we're on to number 6. And I've got some of the carts here. I'm just looking through what I have here. Bear with me. So number 6, in my opinion, would have to be Road Rash 2. Now, Road Rash 1 was a great game, and so was Road Rash 3. Those were great, and a lot of people probably would choose Road Rash 3 over the other two, which rightfully so. I could definitely see why they would choose Road Rash 3. I mean, for $15 to get a cart only, it's worth the money, because you get like 10 to 12 or 13 different worlds, to race on, boards to race on, and upgrading in your vehicle and shit like that is just great. There's more customization you can do, than in the second game, and it had a multiplayer as well. But I don't know. I guess I like Road Rash 2. I do like all of them, to be honest with you. And the first Road Rash, the only problem really is the first one had no multiplayer whatsoever. So it was just a solo game by yourself. But Road Rash 2 capitalized on that, and they made it a 1 or 2 player game. You can see, excuse me, you can see down there, it was a 2-player game. And it really added to the fun factor of this game, I mean, how could you go wrong for that price? Looks like this is priced at $25.99. But I didn't pay that. It was half price when I got the thing. So $26, half price. What was that? Let's see, 13 plus 13. I think that's 13 plus 13 is 26. So I paid $13 for this. $13.50, something like that. It's a good deal, This game will only cost about $20 for a not brand new, but like to have it CIB or have it with the manual and the cart and this, or without the manual. I don't have the manual for this game, but I mean, you can't really go wrong with this game. It's a fun racing game on Sega Genesis, and I liked how they drew out the levels, so they weren't like 15 seconds of you playing. It was actually a drawn out level, going down the road and watching out for cops and these crazy drivers that could hit you with their vehicle when they get close to the screen. And the combat in the game was actually pretty fun, so it worked well. It's a shame that more people don't put this in their top 10 or top 20, because Road Rash 2 was a great game. Alrighty. Now we're on to, I think we're on number 7. So, in my personal opinion, the best RPG game on the system is one of the Phantasy Star games. I only own one of them for Sega Genesis, but I have the Phantasy Star games on the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection game. And what was nice about that collection game is the first game, which was not on Sega Genesis, it was on Sega Master System, is playable on that disc. But you had to unlock some things, to get to it. But still, it was nice that they had that on there. Otherwise, I would have only played Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4. Because I don't own a Sega Master System. But if I was to get a Sega Master System, Phantasy Star and Shinobi would probably be the games that I would pick up for the Sega Master System. Well, I have Phantasy Star 3 here, loose cart. I got it with Zombie 8, My Neighbors, and 2 or 3 other games for like 25 bucks. It's a hell of a deal because this game's going for a lot more. Person probably didn't know what the value of this game is. It's like a $30 game at least by itself, and it's worth more with the actual box. It's about almost 50 bucks with the box and the manual and the case and the cover art. But it's a great RPG. It really defined what RPG should be on Sega consoles. You know, there were some other RPGs on the Sega Genesis like Landstalker, Light Crusader, Fatal Labyrinth, and there were a few others. Sort of Vermilion, I think that was an RPG. You know, so there were some other ones for the console, but they were not on the same level as Phantasy Star. This game just was damn great. It was a damn good game on the Sega Genesis, and it really perfected great RPG games for the 90s. You know, this could compete with Final Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda, and the Ultima games that were on the NES. It perfected it. You know, so that's why I put this at number 7. It's a great game. It's not number 1, but it is definitely up there. 7th or 8th place, most definitely. Then we have number 8, and in my opinion, it actually goes to Comic Zone. I gotta put Comic Zone up here. Comic Zone was a fun comic book style game. I'm a fan of comic books. I like reading comic books. So it was no wonder that I would put this up on my top 10. But Comic Zone was a great game. But I don't understand the one life. Like, that sucks. You only get one life and then it's game over. They should have given you 3 or 4 continues at least. Like, if you screwed up, that's just unforgivable. Like, one life. That's the only thing that sucks about the game. But the rest of the game, the art style, the great creativity of it, and the guy that you play as is cool. And it's like a beat 'em up style game. You go from left to right in the pages of a comic book. You know, you beat guys up, you collect items, and yeah, you open up doors by punching them. It was a really fun game. Number 9 is RoboCop versus the Terminator. Yeah, they also made RoboCop 3 on the Sega Genesis, which I thought was an okay licensed game, but a lot of people, they said that game sucks. But I don't know. I thought I played that one before. It was okay. But this was definitely a better game overall. This is actually an M-rated title as well, if you didn't know. I may not say it right here, but it's mature because there's a lot of blood and gore and violence in the game. But it's not a cheap game. I mean, it was priced at $40. I got it for 20 because of the half off deal years ago when they were closing up their shop. But that being Pastime Legends. But yeah, so this was a side-scrolling shooter game. You play as RoboCop in the game, go through levels, killing bad guys, saving innocent civilians. And there was also some platforming, like climbing ladders and moving across a little, like, slope, you know, where we were like this. But yeah, it's good, and it's definitely one that you want to check out because it's a lot of fun, you know. I would have thought it would be a great game on the Sega Genesis, but it really is. And then number 10 for me is a game where you play as a boy who's probably no older than 10 or 11 years old. And you feel like a badass when you play it. It's definitely Kid Chameleon. Kid Chameleon's a good Sega Genesis game because, like, so you got the premise of this kid goes into a fantasy world, and it's like a platformer game. You whack enemies with a lead pipe or a sword. I don't think it's a sword though. I think it's a lead pipe So that's your weapon. But as you start getting stronger, you start gaining armor on you, and eventually you turn into like this knight. It's like a kid chameleon, basically. A chameleon, badass, and it kicks ass. It's a really great game for the Sega Genesis, and it's definitely a game to pick up. You can also play this, I believe, on the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection game for PS3 and Xbox 360. It's on that. And it might be on the Sonic's Genesis Classics game for PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. It might be on there as well. However you play it, definitely get it, play it. It's not expensive. I think this game on Genesis is around a $15 to $20 game. It's worth a buy if you want to get the original version of this game instead of getting the disc game with a bunch of other Sega games. But whatever way you choose is fine, to be honest with you. But it's a great game, and I highly recommend it. Okay. Now, when we talk about fighting games on the Sega Genesis, there's two in particular that always get a mention on Sega Genesis. And Street Fighter 2 is a great game, and there's like 3 of them on the Sega Genesis. At least I think there are 3. But I have Mortal Kombat 2. This is the only one I have on Sega Genesis, although I've had the first one in the past, which I could easily get because it's only around a $10 game. The third one and excuse me, the third one and Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate, that's the most expensive one. They go for a little bit more money. You can get the first 2 for about $10 each, $12 each, maybe a little bit cheaper. You might get lucky and get them for $7. The third game's, I think, around a $15 game, and the ultimate one, that one costs about $30. So, but if you want the ultimate one, it has like all the Mortal Kombat characters, like you get like 30 characters. But anyways, this is a good game. The only thing that I didn't like is I played this last night a bit. I kept getting my ass handed to me. Like the difficulty in this game is not fair and balanced, I will say. Although the fighting mechanics don't suck in the game, and it is actually satisfying when you do beat the bad guys or the people you're fighting in the game, like Scorpion versus Sub-Zero, or Sub-Zero versus Kano, or Raiden versus, say, Sonya Blade, Sonya or Johnny Cage, or Liu Kang, or one of those characters. Yeah, it's just a really fun fighting game. It was a mature game on the Sega Genesis, so. But other thing I don't understand is why, when I put it on easy, I still get my ass handed to me. I mean, they could have fixed that. Like easy, medium, hard, very hard. They're supposed to mean something. So it shouldn't be that the first guy I fight is hard as hell to beat. Like, I don't understand that. But other than that, it's a great game. It's a minor complaint. It's not a bad game. Mortal Kombat really proved that fighting games have a place in the video game industry, and that they can actually be good and not suck, So that's my number 11 spot. Number 12, I have it on the shelf. It's Street Fighter 2. Championship Edition. It's a great game, great fighting game. Definitely worth playing if you have a Sega Genesis. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely worth your time and effort. And the other one, Super Street Fighter 2, is also a great game as well. I'm tying them both in for this spot at number 12. And the Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, I don't know if that's on Sega Genesis, but if it is, I'll tie that in here too. Just put them all together in one, because they're all great games. Just one play is a little bit different than the other, But they definitely are definitive fighting games besides Mortal Kombat for the list. So number 13. Now we're on to number 13. And in my personal opinion, I think Monopoly deserves a spot. I mean, yeah, I know a lot of people wouldn't put this on their list, but honestly, Monopoly is still a fun game for Sega Genesis, and this version is better than the Super Nintendo version because of one reason. You can literally set the computer at $1 while playing, and you set your guy to have like $2,000 or something, or 15. I think it was $15,000 or something, and see if the guy actually, the computer, is smart enough to make it with just $1 around the board once, and then collect money, you know, and then eventually build property, you know, or if the guy will go bankrupt, or the girl will go bankrupt, the computer. Or there was a two-player mode in it where it'd be you and say your girlfriend, or you and your guy friends playing, and then have like one or two CPUs playing as well to see who would win and own the most properties, and go around the board and collect go and pick up money on free parking and get deeds for houses, and then eventually build houses. You know, it's just a really good game. I remember with Michael, I used to play this game all the time when he would come by and play a Sega Genesis with me, because it was like, man, I only know of a few good Sega Genesis games, but what's one that you could recommend that you think's good besides like Mortal Kombat, Sonic, the Hedgehog, Tin Head, Aladdin? You know, because he only knew of a handful of good ones. You know, I guess he was playing all the shitty Sega Genesis games like, you know, Awesome Possum and Cliffhanger and that other game. What's it called? Beast Wrestler. That's another shit game on the Sega Genesis. You know, and um, and Dark Castle. I saw the Angry Video Game Nerds review on that. That's a terrible game on the Sega Genesis. But this game was great. A lot of fun. We had a blast playing it, and I don't understand why there isn't more people talking about it. This is underrated for a Sega Genesis game because it's good. You know, I highly recommend Monopoly. My number 13 spot. The number 14 spot, actually, I'm not going to put this here. We'll say it. My number 14 spot has to go to Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist. We got to put that up on the list. It's a great game. You know, it was basically Sega's version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4. Turtles in Time, that was on Super Nintendo. But it was a different version. There was similarities to the gameplay, but it was slightly different, you know. And it was just a fun beat 'em up game with the Ninja Turtles, you know. I don't own that game personally, but I played it because I have the Cowabunga collection for PS5. I have that. And it had a lot of the older Ninja Turtles games. And that game is pretty fun. It really is a good game. It's a good beat 'em up style game, and it's definitely worth a mention on Sega Genesis. My number 15 spot has to be Castlevania Bloodlines. A lot of people put this on their list, and rightfully so. It deserves to have a spot mentioned on here, because that Castlevania Bloodlines is a great game. Play as Simon Belmont, go through the levels, crack the whip, hit Medusa heads and vampires in the game, kill vampires, you know, until you get to Dracula and, you know, whoop his ass and things like that. It was a great platformer, side-scrolling platformer game. Definitely needs to be in your collection, and it's worth an honorable mention. I should probably get that game. I haven't played it, but I'd like to get that game. Although, then again, it has vampirism in it, which kind of goes against my faith. So, I don't know, maybe I won't pick it up. But I gotta mention it for the list, because I know a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, no, this list sucks. It doesn't have Castlevania Bloodlines on it. Gotta have it on there. Number 16 is X-Men 2: The Clone Wars. Gotta put at least 2 superhero games up here on the list. This was great. The graphics are pretty good for a Sega Genesis game. The combat in the game is good. Fighting the enemies is good. Everything about this game is fun. You know, it's a good platformer game, side-scrolling platformer. It really is fun playing as Wolverine and kicking butt. And I liked how you didn't have to claw, you know, pull the claw out and then detract the claw like you did in the first game. You didn't have to do that. You just had them ready to go, like smashing enemies and stuff. Um, yeah, overall, it's a great game. You know, I definitely recommend it if you have a Sega Genesis. All right. Number 17 has to be Zombies Ate My Neighbors. This was a great game. It has some horror elements in the game for Sega Genesis. I think this 1993, so it came out when I was a year old. But it's a great top-down like perspective game where you kill zombies and other monsters in the game. Really, they should have called it Monsters Ate My Neighbors because there was more than just zombies that you fight. There's a level where you fight a giant baby, you know, throws shit at you, and just, you know, it was very bizarre. You know, the humor and the uniqueness of the game definitely shines through. Definitely one that you want to try out, you know, if you have a Sega Genesis, for sure. But it's not for the faint of heart. I'm surprised this game wasn't rated M. It should have been, though, because it had blood in it and violence. So probably should have M rating, you know. But back then they didn't really have the M rating, I guess. But yeah, this would definitely be one that I would have rated mature. But yeah, good game. Moving on. Now we have 3 out of, I believe, 4 of the Spider-Man games on the Sega Genesis for number 18th spot. They're all really great games. Spider-Man, this was based off the TV show from 1994 or 1995. And then I have Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. And then they also have one that's cosmetically flawed because of a ripped cover, but I got it for cheap at DK Holders. Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge, you know. And then there was also one that's just called Spider-Man. I don't own that one, but I've seen it before and I've held it in my hand, so I know that there's a 4th Spider-Man game. But they're all pretty fun games for what I played. I do think that the best one, though, is probably this. This was the best Spider-Man game for Sega Genesis, was Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. I like the comic book style art in the game and the cutscenes, and you know, you feel like a badass playing as Spider-Man. And Venom, I guess, helps you out in this game, which is interesting because Venom's not a superhero. But in this game, he's good and he actually helps you out through the game. And you can kind of switch between the two. And it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up game, but it does have some parts of the game where you're climbing up stuff, like walls and stuff, and running. It's good, and I definitely recommend it. Although the licensing was weird, because like this version's made by Acclaim, and the Super Nintendo version was not made by Acclaim. It was made by LJN, the Masters of Crap. They made like a lot of crappy games, you know. Up there is one of the worst video game companies ever, but this version's not that. But it's a good game, good beat 'em up game. And then this was a side-scrolling like game, you know, defusing bombs in the first level as Spider-Man, and you know, trying to get from point A to point B without dying. And then later on, you're using the X-Men character in the game, so it really has you working as both of them, you know. It was a decent game, not bad. And then this one, which was based off the TV show, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up game with some platforming, you know. But I think out of all of them, this is probably my number 18th spot. Alright. Now, oh yeah, I gotta go get the game. Ugh. Gotta fill the void somehow here. Number 19 for me is Shikon the Forever Man. This is a good game. You play as a dude who is immoral or immortal, and it's good. I don't understand the hate behind this game. What is so bad about this game? I don't understand it. It really isn't that bad of a game. It's a side-scrolling platformer beat 'em up type of game where you play as this badass who's got a sword. Actually, he's got dual wielding going on because he's got two swords. And so, I don't know if he's like a demon or what the hell he is, but I just know he's a badass, you know? And he fights these snakes and these other horrific monsters in the game. And it's good. I know it's challenging, I know it's hard, but hard games don't always make or break the game. You know, some people say, "Oh, this game is hard. I hate this game. It fucking sucks." And blah 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 blah. It's a piece of shit game, and this and that. No, I really don't feel that this game sucks. I feel that this game was pretty fun. A lot still have yet to beat this game though, because it is really hard. Like when you die, you go back to your hub world, and you gotta, climb back up and get to that world again, or you end up in another world. So there's different worlds that you're in. It was creative, and I liked it. All right, number 20 is WWF Royal Rumble. This was a good wrestling game for the Sega Genesis. You got all sorts of wrestlers in the game. Now, mind you, this is a 90s game, so there was no Jey Uso, no Roman Reigns, or Kofi Kingston, or Rey Mysterio, nothing like that. So the roster is like Hulk Hogan, Razor Ramon, Macho Man Randy Savage, The Undertaker, Ted DiBiase, probably Papa Shingo, the Narcissist, the Model, and a few other characters. And it's just a really good wrestling game, really fun. Punching and kicking, you can actually hear it, blah, 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 oof, oof, oof. You can hit people in the head with chairs and stuff in the game. You throw them against the rope, and then when they come your way, when they're moving, they fall right on the ground. It's good. It's a good game. It's easy to play, too, which makes it a decent sports game, There was a couple of modes in the game. You had a tag team match, you had a Royal Rumble, you had a one-on-one match, and I think there was a brawl match where it was like a bunch of people in the match just fighting each other, punching and kicking and throwing each other off the turnbuckle, ropes, and jumping on top of people, belly flopping, trying to go for the 3-second pin. It was a good game overall. I didn't mind it. It wasn't bad. There was also WWF Raw, which I do own. WrestleMania, the arcade game, and Super WrestleMania. I own Super WrestleMania on Super Nintendo. I don't own the Genesis version of that. Number 21 is Miss Pac-Man. This is a good time waster. I mean, this is on everything pretty much. You could even play this on PC. But, a lot of people have a soft spot for Miss Pac-Man or Pac-Man in general. But overall, it's a fun game to play. It's easy. You know what you do in Miss Pac-Man. I ain't got to explain it. But it's pretty self-explanatory. And it is a fun game. But I definitely would not put this in my top 10. So, what are the last three for the list? Sonic the Hedgehog 3 goes up here, most definitely. That is a great Sonic game. You gotta have Sonic the Hedgehog 3 up here, and Sonic the Hedgehog 1. So we're tying both of them in at number 23. Although I probably could have put them in my top 10. They probably should be on the list. Higher on the list, But they're both great platformer games. Number 24 is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Great beat 'em up fighting game. It's a really fun game. I own that. It's good. I know there's 2 other Power Ranger games on Sega Genesis, but I only have that one, and it is good. It's a good game. Definitely brings back memories of that TV show when it first aired on Fox Kids. You know, go go Power Rangers, da-da-da. Go go Power Rangers. You know, I remember that tune. I was just a kid when it came out. You know, it wasn't until like '96 or '97 that I was watching it. You know, but I remember it, and the game was actually a good licensed game. And number 25 is what is number 25? I'll put the Adventures of Batman and Robin up here because I am a big fan of that show. So I gotta give credit where credit is due and put that up there. It was a good beat 'em up game, but it is really hard. It is a hard game and definitely challenging for sure. But if you can get used to the challenge of the game, then it's definitely worth your time and effort to play that game because it's great. You get to play as Batman in the game, and then in the 2-player mode, you get to play as Robin as well, which is nice. No Batgirl or Nightwing though, but it's still nice to at least you get to play as Robin as well. So, pretty awesome game. And that's my top 25 Sega Genesis collection. What are your top 10 or top 20 or even your top 25 or top 30 Sega Genesis collection? Be sure to type it down in the comments section below. I'd be interested in knowing what your picks would be for the top 25 Sega Genesis games are, or top 10 or whatever amount you want to put is fine. I'd like to know. So be sure to leave it down in the comments section below and anything else gaming related. God bless you all and take care and thank you for watching. Larry the Batman fan signing off. Peace. Hey, what's going on everyone? So I forgot to add the honorable mentions into this video, so I'm going to be adding this into the video here. There's probably about 20 different Sega Genesis games that I should mention here for the honorable mentions. Ones that I think are actually pretty good, and you're going to be surprised because there's actually going to be a couple of sports games on this list too. So let's not waste any of y'all time. Let's get right into it. Hold on a second. Of course, my glasses are dirty again. Jeez. Anyways, here we go. So the list is this. We'll start with the sports games. We'll get the sports games out of the way till we get to the more interesting titles. NBA Live 96 and NBA Live 97 and NBA Live 98. So the NBA Live series, I believe, started on the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And the first 2 NBA Live games, they're crap. They're crap because they graphically didn't look that good and they didn't play as well, I feel. And they just didn't, they didn't have that many teams in the game, and yeah, they just weren't really that great. So the first one I believe was called NBA Showdown 1994. I think that was the first NBA Live, and they changed the name. And NBA Live 95 I still felt was lacking something. But when NBA Live 96, 97, and the last one 98 came out, they were pretty good. They played well, you know. They had that view, kind of like a, I wouldn't say isometric. They had kind of a different look to it, you know. Instead of like how video games are like 3D with basketball now, with moving this way and that way, you can see the whole thing on the screen. Kind of moved upward a little bit, a slanted type of way. But it worked, and you could see the basketball players well enough. You could see the crowd well enough, and the gameplay was easy to play with a Sega Genesis controller being only A, B, and C, on the controller plus the start and the D-pad. It made it easy to shoot the ball. It wasn't confusing like a lot of these newer basketball games are with the 3D perspective. So they were fun games. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, they were fun games overall. But like I said, they didn't get good until like NBA Live 96 and 97 and 98. And you can get all of them, literally any of the ones I said, for $5, except NBA Live 98. Since that was a late release on the Sega Genesis, I think that one's around $10. Um, a few of those sports games, the last one was like 10, $15. But the rest of them are all like 5 and under. Like, you can't go wrong for $5. Next up is NBA Jam and NBA Jam Tournament Edition. Both games were very fun. They took an arcade game and then they ported it to the Sega Genesis. It was also on the Super Nintendo as well. But I've never seen a side-by-side comparison, but I know a lot of times the Sega Genesis version is better. I mean, with Aladdin was better on the Genesis. I mean, you got a sword in the game. You did not get a sword in the Super Nintendo version. But anyways, that was just an example. But yeah, the Sega Genesis version of the game was awesome. For NBA Jam. Sorry, I was trying to think of what game it was that I was talking about. But NBA Jam was a pretty easy game to play, pick up and play, and it was fun. It was a good game. He's on fire! Boom shakalaka! He slams it down! Yeah, so that's why I choose that. It was a damn near perfect arcade port to the Sega Genesis, you know. So, and then the tournament edition version of the game was also very good as well, I think it added a little bit more to the gameplay. Might have had a few more teams in the game. Not sure what the difference was between the two, but I know that when they make a sequel, there's usually a slight difference between the two to stand out more. Otherwise, it'd just be the same game, just with a different label on the cartridge, which would be pathetic and lame, But that's a good sports series on Sega Genesis. Then there's also NHL 94. A lot of people put NHL 94 on the list. I could see why. You got to get the fights in the game. The controls of the characters in the game and passing the hockey puck was easy to play and pass it. Every now and then you'd get one of these other hockey characters that wasn't on your team that get in the fucking way, which was fucking annoying. But I get it because it's supposed to be competitive. They took some of the fighting I heard out of the NHL games later on. They didn't allow the fighting in them. I guess there was some sort of issues with Sega's licensing or something, because the game was rated kids to adults. Back then that was basically E for everyone, so they were trying to not add violence into the game just to keep it kids to adults, or E for everyone as we call it now. So that's why. But the later versions of the NHL series actually did look a lot better. NHL 97, NHL 98, and NHL 95 and 96, they later on had a better gameplay, more teams, and better graphics, I'd say. Slightly better graphics on Sega Genesis than the predecessors of the games. You could definitely tell the difference. I think the first one was 93, but they had a different name. It wasn't NHL 93, it was NHL Hockey 93 or something, you know. But the first really good one was like NHL 94, you know. The last game I want to mention for sports games is Greatest Heavyweights Boxing. That game was really fun for the Sega Genesis. They had 8 or 9 boxing games on the Genesis. Tough Man Contest, Boxing Legends of the Ring, Muhammad Ali Boxing, James Buster Douglas Boxing, and guess what? They all sucked. They were all garbage. They sucked bad. They played terrible. The physics in the game sucked. It was bad. You know, like Mike Tyson's Punch Out on NES was the first one to get it right because it was actually a fun boxing game. But on Sega Genesis, they did pull through with a good boxing game. Actually, there was another one on Genesis that was worthwhile. That was Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing. That and Greatest Heavyweights were actually good boxing games on the Sega Genesis. You know, the customization of your character, you can make the skin white or the skin black. Upgrade the boxing gloves a bit. You could change the color of your trunks to black, red, blue, green, yellow, different colors, you know. And add stamina and charisma and all this other stuff that you could add to the game, which actually helped the game a bit. Because as you started like whooping ass and, you know, fighting these other boxers, you started getting more powerful and stronger and building yourself up to where you could get more points to use that for stamina and things like that, energy, and could take more damage in the ring. And they played really well. It was like moving this way. It had the sound effects that was right for the game. It just worked really well for Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing. And it also worked for Greatest Heavyweights. Now, the one plus factor of Greatest Heavyweights, I believe, over Evander Holyfield Real Deal Boxing is in Greatest Heavyweights Boxing video game for Sega Genesis, you could actually create your own character and put him in the game and make him look very similar to you. That was mind-blowing for a game that came out in like 1994. Like, wow, that's pretty cool. So those two boxing games I had to highlight here. They were really worth your time. And you can get those games literally for $5. You can't go wrong. Now, if you buy it on eBay, you might pay a little bit of shipping too. So $10, you know. But even that is worth it for that price, $10. You can't go wrong. Alright, now, a game that I didn't mention on the list that I feel needs to be mentioned is Golden Axe. Golden Axe is a great game on Sega Genesis. It was a side-scrolling brawler, or beat-em-up game. You get to play as one of 3 characters, a man with an axe. Well, it's like an elf with an axe. A sexy princess, you know, with like red boots, outfit, and has a sword. Or you can play as this guy who's got like these briefs, boxer briefs on, blue boxer briefs. And I think he has a sword too. And the game's fun. And you can use dragons and other creatures in the game against the enemies. The enemies are riding on them, but you can punch them off and take the dragon, take control of the dragon. Have the dragon whip out his tongue at the enemies. There were parts of the game where if you were struggling, you could hold your hand up high with the sword in your hand. And literally all of this like big storm and shit would come down on them. it would either clear out the screen or it would severely damage them. And then all you had to do was take dead, 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 dead. You know? It was really fun. It's a great game on Sega Genesis. Now, the game is not very cheap on the Sega Genesis unless you get the Sega 6-pack. If you get the Sega 6-pack, that game will cost you around $10. And that's a good game for your money because it also has the first Sonic the Hedgehog on there, the first Streets of Rage, you get Columns, Super Hang-On, and the Revenge of Shinobi all on one cartridge. For $10, you can't go wrong. You could also get the Golden Axe games on that compilation disc for PS3 or the PS4 version. I believe they're all on there. All three of them are great. But if you're a collector like me and you want the official thing, be prepared to pay about $40 or $50 for a copy of the original Golden Axe on Sega Genesis. So, it's up to you. Moving on now, we talk about some other games here. We got Zero Tolerance. I think Zero Tolerance is a good game on the Sega Genesis. I got it in my collection. If you guys have seen my Sega Genesis video, my collection video, that I just did a few days ago. Well, this is the top 25, but this is added in here. This is a Sega related video, but it's not the same thing. Zero Tolerance was one of the only first-person shooter games on the Sega Genesis, besides Duke Nukem, Cyber Cop, I believe is what it was called, and Contra Hard Corps, which is a run-and-gun shooter, but I still count that as a shooting game, and Lethal Enforcers. Yeah, this was a great game. It even has some memorable lines like, handgun ammo collected. You play as a secret agent or a cop in the game, and you go through the levels. You kill bad guys and you rescue hostages in the game. Half the screen, though, I don't know why it wasn't in full screen, but half the screen you can see you with the gun. You only see you with the gun moving around. And the other half, it just shows the person that you're playing as. I don't know why they didn't go for a full screen, but whatever. It works for its time for a game that came out in the early 90s, 1992 or 1993. Or 94. It was one of those years that it came out. But it was a good game. I remember getting, I think, to the second or third level of the game. But I never got past that because I got a wave of enemies coming after me, shooting me, and ended up dying. And then having to switch to the next agent. The game, how it works with the game is you don't get game over until all of your agents are dead. So you have 3 or 4 agents, which gives you 4 opportunities to actually get through the level. I've also heard that this game, if you had 2 television sets and 2 Sega Genesis, you could play multiplayer in this game, which was very interesting and groundbreaking for the time. So isn't that interesting? There was some way to have a multi-tap where you would have 2 TVs and 2 Sega Genesis and could literally see each other battling against each other. That was creative for the time. So, Zero Tolerance ultimately ends up being a great game on the Sega Genesis, but it's underrated and overlooked, unfortunately. And you can get this game between $10 to $15. It's not expensive. It's definitely worth your time and your money. You might even be able to get a complete copy for $20 with the manual and the case and the cover art to get its CIB. Alright, moving on. We have Lethal Enforcers. I thought Lethal Enforcers was a pretty good rail shooter on the Sega Genesis. They also made a sequel, Lethal Enforcers 2 Gunfighters. But it was not as good as the first one. The game is basically you playing as a cop, and in the game you shoot bad guys and rescue hostages. There are robbers that are taking over certain areas, and you have to kill the robbers and save the hostages. You also can get ammo in the game as well. It is able to be played with a Sega Justifier, which is a blue gun. I looked this up. And you can use that in the game. But the Justifier gun is pretty expensive. It's like a $200 item. So you're better off just using the Sega Genesis controller. Because why would I shell out $200 for a blue gun? It just makes no sense. So so I think that Lethal Enforcers ultimately is a good game. On the Sega Genesis, it was very fun to play for a rail shooter. Definitely worth your time. Next up, we have to mention Contra Hard Corps. Contra Hard Corps is a very good game on the Sega Genesis. It's another shooting game. On the Sega Genesis, it was a run and gun shooter game for the Sega Genesis. It was a continuation from Contra 3, or it might have had similarities to Contra 3, but not quite. But it was good. Very challenging too. Very hard. And there's a little bit of platforming, jumping up things, and trying to get across the open areas in the game. Overall, great game on the Sega Genesis, and you can get this game for I think around $30 for a loose cart. I'm not sure how much it goes for a complete copy. It might be about 50 or 60. Then I also want to highlight Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, and Urban Strike. I'm not really into flying games, but this series was actually pretty good. It started with Desert Strike being the first game. Play as a military guy inside of a helicopter. It's got a top-down view perspective where you actually are able to see the helicopter. You do mission-based objectives in the game, like pick up oil crates, pick up these little people, American soldiers, and bring them onto the plane or helicopter, and you destroy waves of enemies with rockets and missiles. You also blow up certain buildings. Once your mission objectives are complete, then you move out and you move to the next level. It's actually a very fun series. More of the same in Jungle Strike. You do similar things like that, although it takes place more in the jungle. It is a direct sequel from Desert Strike, which I believe came out in 1992. Jungle Strike ended up coming out a year later, I believe. And it was just as good as Desert Strike. It was still fun. The environments, the levels are different, though. It might be a bit bigger, more spacious than the first game. But it is definitely the same type of game. You do the same sort of objectives in the game, but it's still worth your time and your money. And the game is still fun to play. And then there's Urban Strike, which was the last set of the Jungle Strike games. Although I think there was one more, but not on Sega Genesis. Soviet Strike, that was on PlayStation and Sega Saturn. But yeah, Urban Strike was also a pretty fun game. Not as good as the first two, but still was a pretty enjoyable game overall. And it's more of the same, but the levels are different, So overall, all three of these games are worth owning if you have a Sega Genesis. Next up, we have is Road Rash. I talked about the second one for this list. The second one has made my list. But the first Road Rash and the third Road Rash 3, they are also both worth owning if you have a Sega Genesis. You can get the first Road Rash game for around $10. You can't go wrong for $10. The second game's around a $15 game. Might be 20, 22, 23 bucks with the case and the manual and the cover art. It all depends on the condition. But they're very fun racing games. You play as a motorcyclist. You go through the levels. You can beat the hell out of cops on bikes with a club. a crowbar or a chain. You can even steal other bike riders' clubs and chains. Grab it from him in the head a couple times and knock him off the bike. And then you're driving down a straight line and you're trying to go for first place. Yeah, it's one of the best racing games on the Sega Genesis in my opinion. Definitely worth checking out if you have a Sega Genesis. And the only one that's expensive is the third one. For some reason, the third one's around a $35 game, I believe. It also depends on if it's complete or not. If it's just the cart, it might be a little bit less, like a $25 game, or 20. But the complete, you're looking at 35, 45, 50 bucks at least. We still got some more to talk about. Rocket Knight Adventures. I never personally played this game, but I've heard nothing but great things about Rocket Knight Adventures for the Sega Genesis. It is a platform game where you play as a mouse or a raccoon, and he has a sword, and he's a knight, you know. So you go through levels. Like I said, it's a platformer. It's a side-scroller as well. And it does have a little bit of beat-em-up style elements in the game because you got to hit enemies in the head with the sword. It's a very good game on the Sega Genesis, and I can understand and see why a lot of people would highlight that as one of the best games on the Sega Genesis. Buck Rogers Countdown to Doomsday is actually a really good RPG game on the Sega Genesis. In fact, years ago, I picked up a Sega Genesis Model 2 for $20 at a thrift store, and it had 7 games. It had Risk, Buck Rogers, Caesar's Palace, a soccer game, a football game, a baseball game, and Centurion, Defender of Rome. I got all that for 20 bucks, and it's because they didn't have the cords to the Sega Genesis. It was just the Sega Genesis with 2 controllers with no cords. So I had to buy the cords separately. I don't have that Sega Genesis anymore, by the way, or any of those games. I wish I still did, because Buck Rogers is not a cheap game. It's currently going for around 30 to 40 bucks loose cart. Actually, no, I think it's a $20 bill. It's around that price range. I think it's 20 to 35 depending on the condition. Maybe a little bit more with the box and the manual. But it's a great RPG game. It's kind of got that, like, go over to that person, talk to this person, talk to that person. Then the combat, of course, in the game, where you whack enemies with a sword, I believe. It was really good. Now, graphically, it may not look as good as it used to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the game is terrible. The game's actually pretty good, and it still plays very well to this very day for a Sega Genesis game. It's a great RPG, and definitely one that you want to get if you have a Sega Genesis. Next up, we have a Shining Force and Shining Force 2. Also, great RPG games on the Sega Genesis. Definitely a reason to have the Sega Genesis, and definitely a reason to play the Sega Genesis. They are tactical strategy RPG games on the Sega Genesis, and it does have some like turn-based type of combat in the game. You hit the enemy, then the enemy hits you, and you keep going back and forth. It was trying to be very similar to Final Fantasy. Maybe not quite on the level of Final Fantasy, but it was still a pretty damn good game. A damn fine one at that, for sure. Both of them were worth playing if you have a Sega Genesis. And definitely a contender for one of the best RPG games on the Sega Genesis, besides the Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4. And then we get into the fighting genre, because not all the fighting games on the system were sucky. I did mention Mortal Kombat earlier in this video and Street Fighter, so I'm not going to mention them here, even though I technically just did. I I'd say Fatal Fury and Fatal Fury 2. Those are good fighting games on Sega Genesis, made by SNK. SNK made a lot of great games. They started making games on the Neo Geo, which I've never owned a Neo Geo. It's crazy expensive to get a Neo Geo, and the cartridges look too fucking big. You know, fucking huge. Like, they're bigger than my hand. And a lot of the cartridges are just too damn expensive. Like, I'm not gonna pay $100 for one cartridge. Just insane. You're better off playing SNK Volume 1 for PS2 or PSP. That game has a bunch of Neo Geo games, but on the system. But, yeah, this was a great fighting series. It's a shame that they haven't made one in forever. The last one we got was on the PS2. Excuse me, with the Fatal Fury Collection, Volume 1 and Volume 2. That was about it. But they're fair and balanced fighting games, and the fighting mechanics in the game are pretty good. Some of the characters are interesting. Yeah, it's a great fighting game. It's too bad they haven't come back in a long time with Fatal Fury. Samurai Showdown is also a great fighting game on the Sega Genesis. It is definitely a good one. Definitely a highlight for sure. You play as a samurai character. It's kind of like a warrior with a sword, and you fight with swords and stuff. So it's like before Soul Calibur was a thing that had samurai warriors. They later on did make a Samurai Warriors game on Xbox 360, but it was really tough and hard to play, and I don't think it was as good as the original on Sega Genesis. The game was also released on the Sega, not the Sega CD, the Panasonic 3DO, and that game actually was pretty good on the 3DO as well, for being one of the only worthwhile games on the Panasonic 3DO. I think there was one on PlayStation or PS2. I'm not entirely sure though. But you can literally get a copy of this game on Sega Genesis for about $15. You can't go wrong for that price. I picked up my copy at Mr. Deals at $12.99. Not bad for a loose cart. Complete might be about $25 to $30. But it's a good fighting game on the Sega Genesis and definitely worth your time. So those are just some of the honorable mentions that I have for the Sega Genesis. I have a funny feeling that there's a few that I'm missing though for the list. Captain America and the Avengers, that's a good one. Definitely recommend that. I think that Skitchin is a good game. It's kind of like Road Rash, but instead you're on like rollerblades, and you got to watch out for traffic that's oncoming, you know, in your way. And then you hold on to cars too while a car is driving. You know, you can hold on to them. That was pretty cool. Pretty good game on the Sega Genesis. There's also Sonic Spinball. I gotta mention Sonic Spinball. I think that's a good pinball game in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. It wasn't a normal Sonic game, really, typically speaking, because it wasn't a platformer. It was more pinball related. But I thought that that was fun, and you can literally get a copy of that for $10 or less on Sega Genesis. I mean, you can't go wrong. Or you could get the compilation disc, the PS3 Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection game, or the PS4 game. I think it has Sonic Spinball in both versions. You really gotta get that. It's good. There was a sequel to Rocket Knight Adventures. It was called Sparkster. Of course, that is worth owning if you have a Sega Genesis. General Chaos, which is a strategy RTS type of game. I've heard that a lot of people like that. I've never played it personally, but I've seen gameplay on that. Centurion, Defender of Rome, that's another RTS game on the Sega Genesis. If you're into that, then that is definitely up your alley. Blades of Vengeance, that's another good one. That's an action platformer game. You play as a chick in the game. You know, whack people with your sword. And there's some platforming too. There's like a little thing that moves this way. At this one part of the game, you had to jump on that instead of falling into the lava. and to be very careful with your jump. But that game's a pretty good game as well for the Sega Genesis. So those are just some of the Sega Genesis titles that I can think of that are worthwhile. I hope you enjoyed this part of the video here. Be sure to comment down below and tell me which ones you would recommend for the Sega Genesis picking up or buying. And what is your top 20 or top 10 favorite Sega Genesis games? I would love to know what your opinions are on that. Comment down below. And please don't forget to subscribe. I'd like to get to 300 subscribers if we can within the next month. It'd be great. Thank you all for watching and thank you for listening. Larry the Batman fan signing off. Peace. And God bless you. Another honorable mention for this video here is Jurassic Park. I feel like that is an honorable mention for the Sega Genesis. That's a licensed game based off a really good film by Steven Spielberg, but the game was actually pretty good. There were a few minor annoyances with the game, such as like towards the end of the first level, when you would jump down, it doesn't like show the area down below you, so you just blindly jump down and there's a pit there. There's a little bar here and a bar on the other side, but half the time you end up falling through the pit, so that was a nuisance. There is some annoying enemies, like I didn't think the small little dinosaur that's on the screen would hurt me, but he literally comes over to you and starts biting at you for no apparent reason. I knew the big dinosaurs would fight me, and the pterodactyls that are up in the sky, because they throw shit at you, but I didn't expect a baby dinosaur to attack me. So at random I get attacked and I was like, oh, I didn't think that I would be attacked by this raptor, this little green raptor, but I was, and then I had to shoot at it. So there was a few annoyances with the game. It wasn't a perfect, definitely not a 9 out of 10 like GoldenEye, being like the greatest licensed game ever made, but it was still a pretty good game for what it was. And I also almost forgot to mention WWF Raw, which is another good wrestling game on the Sega Genesis. That's also a really good one as well. Lots of combos and punching and kicking, and you hear the sound of oof, oof, oh, 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 things like that in the game. It's good. It's just as good as the other one on Sega Genesis, the WWF Royal Rumble, which I did put on the list here. So that's another good one.